Hey everyone, it's Lexi. So in today's video I'll be sharing with you the top 5 books that I read over the spring season. So these are I'll go over all the books that I read over the months of March, April, and May, and then I will go more in depth into the ones that made my top 5. So yeah, without further ado, let's get started. So starting out with the month of March, I first read Dragonfly by Lila Meacham, which I gave a 4.5 out of 5 stars. The Rose Code by Kate Quinn, which I gave a 5 out of 5 stars. The Lions of Fifth Avenue by Fiona Davis, which I gave a 1 out of 5 stars. The Name of the Star by Maureen Johnson, which I gave a 3 out of 5 stars. A Trick of the Light by Louise, which I gave a 4 out of 5 stars. And Heartbreak Bay by Rachel Caine, which I gave a 4 out of 5 stars. So moving on to April, I read a total of 6 books. The first book was Sunflower Sisters by Martha Hall Kelly, which I gave a 5 out of 5 stars. West with Giraffes by Lynda Rutledge, which I gave a 3 out of 5 stars. The Madness Underneath and The Shadow Cabinet by Maureen Johnson, which I gave a 2 and a 3 out of 5 stars. And lastly, I ended up reading The Beautiful Mystery and How the Light Gets In by Louise, which I gave a 3.5 and a 5 out of 5 stars. And then finally, moving on to May, I first read In Her Tracks by Robert Dugoni, which I gave a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Terry by Douglas Coupland, which I gave a 4 out of 5 stars. The House on Mango Street, which I gave a 1 out of 5 stars. The Long Way Home and The Nature of the Beast, which I both gave a 4 out of 5 stars. The Maidens by Michaelides, which I gave a 4 out of 5 stars. The Hunting Party, which I gave a 2 out of 5 stars. And finally, The Paragon Hotel by Lyndsay, Faye, which I gave a 4 out of 5 stars. So as you can see, that over the month of spring there were books that I just fell in love with, and there were some that were definitely misses, but overall I feel like I enjoyed the vast majority of the books that I read. And so starting out, I first have to include this series that I've honestly been marathoning for so long, and I think you guys are probably sick and tired of me talking about, and it is the Inspector Gamache series, in particular the book How the Light Gets In. And then I think what is unique about this series is that it's very character focused, so especially with each book we find out more and more about these characters, which I love. But for those of you who don't know, this follows Inspector Gamache, who is head of the homicide detective, he's head of the homicide department in Quebec, and a lot of his murders that he ends up having to work on involve a town called Three Pines, which is this quaint town that has a unique cast and ensemble of characters that are really unique. But you can tell that this was the book that the author was building towards, and it did not disappoint. I don't want to go too much into what it is because you kind of learn more and more with each of the books, but this one honestly was so amazing. I was left speechless with this. It was just so much going on. Not only are you dealing with a murder, Gamache is dealing with this murder investigation of this woman who had contact with someone from Three Pines, but then there's all this political stuff going on as well, and the ending was crazy. So like I said, I have to be vague when I talk about this because I don't want to spoil anything for those of you who want to kind of be more involved with this series. So I don't want to spoil anything, so just leaving it as that. But this book is honestly amazing. Like I said, this is the one that all the books before were building towards, and I've read a few of them that take place after this, and I'm still loving it. So yeah, like I said, this has quickly become my favorite crime series of all time, and yeah, I just talk too much about this series I just love it. I'm obsessed. Next up would have to be The Paragon Hotel by Lyndsay, Faye, and this is finally we have a book club pick that I actually enjoyed. The first 2 books that I picked out for this year were just really big misses, so yeah, I was finally happy that I found one that I actually really enjoyed. And so this one I had a little bit of a rough start getting into, just getting used to the dialogue. So it was a rough ride for the first 100 pages or so, and it wasn't until that I got past that 100 page point that I really got invested in the story. But this novel follows a girl named Alice who and it takes place in the 1920s, I should say. And so Alice arrives in Portland with 2 bullet wounds and a trunk load of $50,000 $1,000 in cash, and she is running from the mafia, and so she ends up crossing paths with a guy named Max, who is a black man who works on the train, and he takes her to the Paragon Hotel, which is a blacks only hotel, and he helps her, you know, get medical attention. But while she's there, she ends up really forming a nice relationship with the residents of the hotel. But as the KK is closing in, there is some kind of hostility towards blacks that is kind of escalating, and when a kid goes missing, Alice really drops everything to find out what happened, and so it kind of goes off from there. But we also get flashbacks to eventually Alice, like what led her to become part of the mafia, and then eventually the events that ended up with her getting shot. So like I said, there's a lot going on in here. I feel like it's just kind of best go into it, but like I said, it's a little bit of a rough go in the beginning, but once you start kind of figuring everything out, then it's much better. But I think this book does a really good job at not shying away from the darker sides to the Roaring Twenties. I feel like the 20s in particular are very much glamorized from a historical point of view, but this author doesn't shy away from looking at it from a critical angle, in particular in regards to the violence against black people, the escalation of racism, all these other things that I think are still very relevant today, but they're kind of glossed over from a historical standpoint, and I really like that. Yeah, I just loved the characters in here. I love the mystery aspect. Like, I just really loved the atmosphere of this, just with like, it was like almost like a noir film with like the Roaring Twenties, like mafia, and then insert some racism like themes in here. And so it's a very unique read, but I overall really enjoyed it. So I'm happy that we finally have a book club pick that was pretty good. Next up, this is probably one of my most anticipated books of the year, and it is The Rose Code by Kate Quinn. And this is her newest novel following 3 women who worked as part of, I always forget the name of this, but like Bletchley Park, which was basically where the code breaking was done throughout the war. And so post-war, we get to see these women. One person is in an insane asylum and the other 2 aren't speaking to each other. But when the person who's in the insane asylum sends a letter to one of them, they know something is going on. So we get flashbacks to these 3 characters eventually getting recruited, becoming friends, and what ultimately led to the fallout. And I really love this. I think it's very interesting to showcase the female narratives of this time, because I feel like we obviously think of the men doing the fighting during the war, and this was the war that was fought on the home front by the women, and I loved it. I loved the characters. It was just honestly a great historical fiction novel, and I loved how the author was able to weave in both the past and present storylines, and she does it in a way that it doesn't feel like you're reading 2 different stories. Each of the different narratives ultimately progresses the overall storyline together, which I liked. But yeah, this is, I think, like, the Alice Network will still always be my favorite, but I really like this one. It is very, if you like the Imitation Game movie, then you'll like this, because this takes place in that same kind of park area doing the same code breaking and all that. So yeah, I loved it. Like I said, this one I knew I was gonna like, and I was not disappointed. Next up, this is a new author, and I saw this book at the bookstore and I was like, I really was intrigued by the cover, the title. I liked it all. So, and it was Dragonfly by Leah Meacham, and this is a World War II historical fiction novel that takes place in Nazi-occupied France. And so post-war, we follow one of the spy agencies, like, who was the head of the operation, and he stumbles upon a book that talks about the operation that he was a part of, but something peculiar is written in this kind of representation of it, because they say that all members of Team Dragonfly made it out of France alive, and that's very different from what he understands, because he assumed that in addition to everyone else in the team, that one person was killed as they were trying to get out of France. And so he is trying to really figure out what is going on. So while this is going on kind of in the present day narration, we also get flashbacks to the ultimate, like, the people that were a part of Dragonfly being recruited, their time in France and their spying and espionage and everything like that, and then ultimately the events that led up to the supposed death of that one person. And I really like this. I read this for a book club with my friends and we all really liked it. I think like it was a little bit difficult because it was especially the male characters just distinguishing who was who, and they do provide you like with a cast of characters in addition to like their code names. So that was the only hard thing, was just keeping track of everyone and their code names and everything like that. But the author tells it in such a suspenseful way because you can see the webs that these characters are kind of weaving in terms of their lives that they have to create for themselves, and you also get kind of the German enemy perspective of like maybe they're figuring out like there's something off, but everything is so interconnected in terms of the character storylines that I was just totally invested. And I definitely want to pick up more of this author's work in the future. Like I said, I was really blown away by this. I wasn't expecting it to love it as much as I did, and it was honestly just spectacular. So I'm happy that I have another kind of historical fiction author that I can read in the future. And lastly, this should come as no surprise, and it is Sunflower Sisters by Martha Hall Kelly. And this is the final book in the Lilac Girls trilogy. And so this is a historical fiction that is loosely based off of a real life family in terms of their contribution throughout, you know, American history and the war. So in the first book, we follow Caroline and her story during World War II. In the second book, we follow Eliza, who is Caroline's mother during World War I. And then in this case, we follow their great-grandmothers during the Civil War. And so for this one, this is again a multi-point of view story. So we follow Georgie, who is Caroline's great-grandmother, and her I think great aunt, actually, sorry, great aunt. And so she is she's training to become a nurse during the Civil War era. She wants to help fight the South and like abolish slavery. So she's very much adamant to take on this strong important role in a kind of an era where women were kind of not really encouraged to do those things. And so we get her perspective of like a white woman in the North. Then we also follow a girl who is a slave on a tobacco plantation, and then we also get the perspective of the slave owner in the South. So I really like this one. In the beginning, you know how these slave and the slave owner narratives are connected, but you don't know how they're going to connect to Georgie's narration. And so I really like this one, and I haven't really read any historical fiction from this era, particularly the Civil War, so it was very new to me, and I just loved it. Like, it was very well done. I was totally invested in these characters, and I think the author does a really good job at showcasing this era in terms of like the overall racism and the discourses and the dialogues that are created during this time, and it kind of comes full circle into what we're currently dealing with now in the United States. And yeah, it was just really beautifully written. I loved it. She has very, very lyrical writing, and I could just lose myself in these pages, and I would just like look up and be like, oh my god, I already read 50 pages. Like, that's how you know the author is really a really good writer. So I am so sad that this trilogy is over, but I think it will be exciting to see what this author takes on next. So that's it, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments below what some of the favorite books that you read this season were and all of that fun stuff. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, and I will see you guys next time. Bye, guys.